Okay, we're running a little bit behind, sorry. It's 10:03 a.m. on Friday, 15th of April. Because I understand it, Tax Emancipation Day nationally. If you haven't got your taxes done, don't worry, you've got till the 18th, the night of the 18th. That's, you heard it here first. This is the April 2016 Public Safety Committee meeting. I'm the chair. My name is Paul Horman. We will start by doing a roll call. We'll go around the table, and before we start, Forrest, when you get to do your assemblyman elect. Okay, yeah, for the record. And we're honored to be joined by one of our newer members. I hope he'll become a member of the Public Safety Committee and represent East Anchorage in his interest in public safety. That's it. If you'd start with the corner chief, please.
Dennis LeBlanc, Anchorage Fire Chief.
Chris Tolley, Chief of Police.
Nathan,
Nathan's
our IT guy extraordinaire. Melinda Freeman, the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Rob Fish, Officer of Emergency Management.
Forrest Dunbar, Assemblyman elect from East Anchorage.
Phil Evans.
Toby Bridges.
Jake Gray.
Paul Horman.
Laura Morris, Mayor's Office.
Todd Sherwood, Legal Department.
Okay, is there anybody here that might, well, if we get to the point where you're presenting something, just introduce yourself with your name, because we are recording. So just remember, whatever you say, maybe help them while you're speaking, sir. For the company. Mr. Attorney, do you have a?
Yes, let's change the other day, Mr. Chairman, take up the health department first, they've got some projects.
Okay, very
We'll
good.
do them first.
Any objection to hear, looks like Mr. Lassard's ready for a presentation. Mr. Lassard?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Lassard. I work with the Department of Health and Human Services. I am the Emergency Preparedness Manager, and I also manage the Anchorage Safety Patrol and Center Services, which I had briefed back a while back, if you'll remember. This morning, what I'd like to do is, we just recently went through statewide Alaska Shield 2016 exercise. There was, of course, a heavy involvement of the municipality in the exercise this year also, with police, fire, OEM, the health department, our local community partners. And what I wanted to do today was basically talk to you about some of the things that went on during that exercise, with more or less a focus on the health department. I know that's kind of a surprise, but.
And I'm your admin assistant today.
Oh, okay, so this
Yeah.
isn't working, okay.
So,
The first slide, basically, the scenario is pretty, could be pretty detailed, but I want to just give you kind of the macro overall picture for our purposes today and move right into the briefing. Essentially, the basis was a scenario that for Anchorage that took place on the UAA campus here. Involved an active shooter, which was a lone gunman, shooting people at the university, causing between 8 and 12 casualties. For our purposes over at the health department, 8 or 12 casualties really doesn't drive us into an emergency response type operation. It would be different. It's totally different, of course, for the police and fire. And of course, they were very much involved in that portion of the exercise on site. The health department was not involved in that portion on site. But what the next thing that happened in the scenario is there was an explosion at one of the, as they called the Phillips Science Building at UAA, which caused, we had, theoretically or scenario-wise, about 300 people in the building, producing around 150 casualties. Now that, on the other hand, drives us into a mass casualty and a medical surge response, which would involve the health department as well as the wider healthcare community and hospital community in Anchorage. So once again, this is our public safety stool. We got the fire department, DHHS, and APD. So at this time, I would open it up to if either the chiefs or someone from fire or police or OEM would like to make any comments about Alaska Shield before I dive into the details of the DHHS involvement.
I just have a few notes on meeting the objectives. There are 4 objectives, and from APD's perspective, UPD and APD dispatch centers successfully coordinated all communications during the exercise while simultaneously testing APD's ability to patch multiple outside agency radio channels. Very important exercise. Objective 2, public information and warning. UPD and APD public relations departments provided essential and timely information to Anchorage residents, including UAA campus students and staff. For Objective 3, which was operational coordination and support, APD provided a lieutenant to liaison with UAA Campus Emergency Operations Center, EOC, within the 30-minute goal that was created for the exercise. And the fourth objective on scene security and protection. APD and UPD officers, along with FBI agents, demonstrated exceptional skills and tactics during this exercise, which resulted in a successful resolution of the exercise. APD, UPD, FBI, and AFD personnel successfully implemented the Rescue Task Force, which is known as RTF concept, by triaging and rescuing victims from warm zones, while other officers dealt with the active shooter.
Any questions so far? Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And also, in addition to this public safety stool, we talk about the fire department, health department, and APD. I'd also like to bring out a couple things that elements or members of the community that help drive this whole exercise and make the participation, I guess, worthwhile and help us meet our exercise objectives. The first agency or body I would talk about is the Joint Medical Emergency Preparedness Group. That is essentially the local Anchorage Healthcare Coalition, led primarily by the 4 main hospitals that service the Anchorage Bowl area. Of course, J-Bear, Alaska Regional Hospital, Alaska Native Medical Center, and of course Providence, Alaska Medical Center. Also, of course, we work closely with the state of Alaska, more specifically the Department of Health and Social Services in their Office of Emergency Operations. And then, of course, OEM, we couldn't do what we had to do without OEM supporting us with the EOC, the white cell support, and the exercise controlling. And then, I'll go right down to People Mover. We have a partnership with People Mover that allowed us to produce a capability here locally that is fairly new to Anchorage the last couple of years. It's what we refer to as the MAB, or the Medical Ambulance Bus 1. We've also referred to it as the AM bus. Essentially, it's a transport bus, regular People Mover bus that has been retrofitted with a litter system that allows us to transport 12 litter patients at a time. We also have a communications package on board that allows the dispatch to talk to their people, allows our radio folks to talk to the hospitals, to AFD, to APD if necessary. And we also have a GPS tracking system on board that allows us to see, when we're in our operations center, we can, or the AFD or the police can see where that bus is actually at in the community, whether it's at the hospital or over at our alternate care site, which I'll talk more about. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that partnership there. And then, of course, we have this other acronym, and you'll hear me refer to it multiple times. It's, for us, it's within the health department, it's called the Crisis Health Action Team. And essentially what that is we have our missions. We need, the core of any system, of course, is the people that operate the system. So we need trained people to be able to perform our missions from the health department. And there's always, in everybody's job description, it talks about emergency response and the 5%, other duties is assigned, but I'll focus on the emergency response piece. So with DHHS leadership, we've been able to basically train over 70% of the health department. Our goal is 100%. We have 73 trained folks right now that have been specifically trained in ICS, which is the incident command structure for emergency response. We have them trained on the 3 core health missions, and of course on also departmental operations procedures. So essentially in the past, it's been folks were expected to be called on in emergencies, and we're all expected to respond during an emergency. So our philosophy or thought process was behind it. Let's train folks so they really anticipate or they know what they're getting into, and of course that'll lessen the anxiety level. That's our goal, to really bring down that anxiety level about being a responder. And 2 is that the folks will be more apt to respond, knowing what's expected when they get here. So that's the kind of the thrust there. And of course, this is all supported by the Homeland Security Presidential Directive number 8. I have to read this, and I'm not going to read it to you, but the highlight here, of course, is public health is a part of that first responder structure, along with emergency management, and that include other people too. Like when we do the AMBUS, for instance, the crew consists of a bus commander, an assistant commander, and a staff person. Plus, there's a bus driver, because we don't, at the health department, drive the People Mover bus. So at that time, that people mover driver as being an operator of an essential piece of equipment is a first responder also. Next slide, please. So I told you I was going to touch on the 3 core health department missions. And these are FEMA terms, so that's what we try to say consistent with the definitions and the terminology. So in the first area, we talk about mass prophylaxis. That's in shorthand is pills to people. So we are what is considered Anchorage is a Cities Readiness Initiative city, which is a federal CDC program. That puts us under the purview of the National Stockpile Program, and the Strategic National Stockpile Program is essentially a CDC program where they pre-position medicines, medical equipment at unknown or secret locations throughout the United States in order to bring those to any city within 12 hours of an incident. So to kind of just take that a step further, so the gold standard in regards to SNS or Strategic National Stockpile is if there were a worst case scenario anthrax attack on Anchorage, for instance, we would be expected to get those medications distributed to all 300,000 residents of the city within a 48-hour period. And basically we have equipment and trained people and identified sites to basically execute that mission. And then of course some of you may recall the H1N1 that was back in 2009, I believe, 9. Anyways, and that's another example of a mass immunization program that we would mount also in a very similar fashion. It's about once again establishing points of distribution throughout the community at geographically dispersed areas in order to get as many people in as quickly as possible to make those medicines or immunizations available. The next mission is mass care, which is kind of a lot of folks flip these back and forth: mass care, mass casualty. But the distinction is mass care, just think about sheltering. Mass care is about sheltering evacuees or displaced people. And along with that is goes the pet sheltering, because it's been proven in many disasters throughout the country that people will be reluctant to evacuate or go to shelter if they know that there's not an accommodation or a system of services available for pets. So, and then we'll talk about the third leg of this stool, which was basically the thrust of the whole Alaska Shield 2016 exercise, which is the mass casualty medical surge piece. I'd like to just back up 1 second. Just so you know, last year, in 2015, the capstone exercise for our year was an exercise by the state that was called Pills to Polar Bears. And that was the exercise of our Strategic National Stockpile Plan and distribution strategy. So under mass casualty, we talk about medical surge. Essentially, the role the health department is going to play in a mass casualty medical surge scenario within the cities is to support our acute caregivers, which are the 4 main hospitals, in making their beds available for acute patients. So that, there'll be another slide where I'll get into that a little bit more. But what I say is the nutshell kind of phraseology we use is we want the hospitals to take acute patients, trauma injuries in the front door, while we're at the back door taking out the non-acute patients and bringing them to somewhere else, freeing up those beds. And then, of course, we talk about, and that entails our MAB, our medical ambulance bus, that 12-liter patient-carrying people mover bus. And then also I'll talk about the alternate care site, which is essentially a low-acuity, temporary medical care site that we can set up for 150 beds that would allow, if there was nowhere else for those patients to go, to come under care in a facility that we would set up. So, once again, Alaska Shield 2016, we exercised pretty much the about 6 hours on the April 1st, which was kind of unfortunate because it was April Fool's Day. So there was a lot of, and I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but there's a lot of messaging and things that had to go on so people knew that, hey, there's a shooting going on, this is an exercise, this is an exercise, this is an exercise, because that could very well get out of hand or create a lot of anxiety or problems that wouldn't be needed. So anyways, when DHHS, we planned for this exercise with the Joint Medical Emergency Planning Group and OEM and all our other partners, UAA and the Police Department and Fire, we looked at setting up 4 main objectives or 4 venues that we were going to exercise. The first one was at the actual EOC, or our Emergency Operations Center at 1305 E Street. That's OEM's Operations Center. And what we were fielding there was the hospital liaison desk. So I'll show you something else a little bit later that shows you how the local hospital and healthcare system plugs into our EOC in order to get the support from the city that they need during a time of emergency. Then we also have an operation that we call the Health Department Department Operations Center, which we call DOC for short, and that's actually at the Health Department building. And I'll get into that a little bit more and show you what that looks like and what we do there. Then we have the alternate care site is essentially packed up in 7 trailers with the cots, the medical equipment, all the things, the linens, everything we need to field that facility. And we have pre-identified and checked out facilities throughout the Anchorage Bowl area that would accommodate that. Having said that, essentially we could take it anywhere that had the footprint and the services that we needed to conduct that operation. In this, we had never used, well, of course, the UAA Alaska Airlines Center is a brand new facility. So during this exercise, we were actually able to validate that facility as a potential site for setting up that alternate care site. And then, of course, once again, back to the mobile ambulance bus 1, that was kind of the hinge operation of the whole thing, being able to get to the hospitals, load patients, take them to the alternate care site, and then in one instance to an actual other healthcare provider. So, thank you. Here's another depiction, of course. There's the EOC, our DOC, the MAB is out there at large, and the Alaska Airlines Center. So we got essentially 4 health department folks at the center. We got 18 folks that were exercising in the health department and the DOC. We didn't really need 18, but we approach training with the idea of, we could either you balance between the least amount of impact on the normal operations of the health department, which we would have less people involved if that were the case, or to maximize the training benefit for the most amount of people as possible. On this particular one, we tried to expand it to include as many people as possible. And there's the MAB. Once again, there was the 3 staff, the bus driver, and then our director did a ride-along for with the bus to see how everything went. So that gave her an opportunity to see not only this operation, but also what was going on at the alternate care site. Okay, so just to recap about the whole medical surge kind of philosophy or intent. So we have an event happen that produces mass casualties. These trauma victims start hitting the local hospitals. The hospitals are going to respond in a couple different ways. The first thing they're going to do is probably cancel all-day surgeries. They're going to start discharging. They're going to do all these internal things that they would normally do when they're in a surge operation. Okay, then they're going to look at, hey, can some of these folks go to a different hospital here in town? If there's not another hospital available, can some of these folks go to a different type of medical facility, either a surgery center or a extended care or whatever that might be? Is this situation so overwhelming that we should be looking at pushing folks out of state? Basically, that was Alaska Shield 2014. We did a forward patient movement exercise, which was essentially loading the folks up at the hospitals under a mass casualty medical surge event and getting them out to J-Bear to a facility where they were transferred to and prepared for flying out of state to another VA hospital, which are several throughout the United States. But for our purposes, for Alaska Shield, the part that we really focused in on was decompressing the local hospitals to the local alternate care site. And you'll see another leg down here. It comes down to Alaska Medical Station. Under the Strategic National Stockpile System, there's also a program that's called the Federal Medical Station Program, which is essentially mobile hospitals, 250 beds, for lack of a better term, alternate care facility at a larger, more acute type facility. They don't have one. They did not have one in Alaska. The federal government actually signed one over to the state of Alaska. We now call that the Alaska Medical Station. Once again, and we could probably even add, one more. We'd probably even add one more leg under here where you would have federal medical stations. So we'd go ACS, Alaska Medical Station at state level, and then federal if that's what it required. We talked a little bit, sir.
No, sorry, he's waving at me.
Sorry, Mark. He was waving.
So we talked about the hospital liaison desk, and this what I refer to as either the flywheel or the quarterback of the system. So our hospitals are sending information and requests into the EOC that get that get vetted, analyzed, and resourced here out of the hospital liaison desk. So they're either going to be sending medical requests for like staffing, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment. We don't have that kind of stuff really at the municipal level, so that'd be going straight up to the state into the state's DHHS emergency log system. If it's commodity type items, I'm talking about blankets, cots, stuff that not necessarily medically related, but would be needed for the hospital support, utility fixes, things like that, diesel fuel to keep their generators running. That would go into the main EOC and get sorted out at the EOC logs portion. Now, there's other stuff that we talked about, the alternate care site, the patient transfer, the patient forward movement, and those things, once we realize here that those are needed, that starts getting fed to the Departmental Operations Center over at DHHS, where they can start running those operations or basically deploying those operations out of here. And then, of course, there's the steady communication between here to keep everything running, which is, of course, any emergency exercise you go into, there's always the talk. The communication is always the toughest piece of all, making sure people know what's going on. So I got a few photos. I'm going to run through and I'll just explain what they are. This is actually the EOC, the municipality's EOC. This is the hospital liaison desk. We've got our health department folks that are kind of running things. We got a section leader, which are public health nurses, and we got a couple support people that help them sort the documentation and keep things running. And then these folks with the yellow vests or where these chairs are, that's where the actual hospital liaison representatives come from. And of course, the hospital liaisons are the 4 major hospitals, which we talked about before: J. Bear Regional, Providence, and Alaska Native Medical Center. This is the Departmental Operations Center. We're kind of gearing up for Alaska Shield, getting ready. You can see, once again, there's computer stations. We have reader boards so people know what's going on as the exercise or the operation unfolds. We've got, vests and distinctive markings for our responders. We've got radio communications. And then this is just kind of the reverse. It's a fairly good sized room, and it works well for what we use it for. And then, of course, this is just a reverse angle shot to show you how big the place is. We use a lot of whiteboards, a lot of notes, writing things down. This is the staff of the Departmental Operations Center, and they're receiving their incident briefing at this time from the incident commander. Now, this is what the map looks like if you see it out on the street. Also, I would throw in a plug that this vehicle, this asset's going to be deployed out for public viewing during the Anchorage Fire Department open house on May 14th. So if you'd like to take a closer look at it, you can come down then. Or if you'd like to take a closer look, you can give me a call. We can go over to the bus barn where it's stored and ready. This is what the interior looks like. So once again, this is the rear of the bus. There's 6 stretcher stations here, and then in the belly or the forward portion of the bus, there's another 6 stations. And of course, it has to be loaded and unloaded in a certain way, in a certain order, a certain cadence. We have trained with the National Guard to do that. It is not easy, and the National Guard folks all work really well. They're young, they're strong, and they're fit, and so we've worked with them. They were loading and unloading the bus within 4 to 5 minutes. So it worked out really well. This is, once again, this is our bus crew as a commander and the support. There's our director, Melinda, and this is the driver from People Mover, Sonia. And essentially what would happen in any emergency or whatever, we bring folks in and we brief them up on what the scenario or what the situation is, what's going on. And in this instance here, I'm providing just-in-time training to make sure they understand what all the components of the bus are, how everything works, where they're going and what they're going to do. And then, of course, this is the onboard portion of the briefing where I'm going over the communications package and the radios and whatnot. There it is at Alaska Regional. Each hospital has a primary and alternate point for pickup and delivery of patients. we don't take the bus to the emergency room entrance and exit. That's gonna be being occupied by those acute patients coming from the scene of the incident. We're going, once again, to the back door at a pre-designated spot for each hospital. There's, that's at A&MC where the emergency manager is turning over his paperwork to our bus crew. There we are at Providence. I just thought it was a nice picture. This is the alternate care site that we were talking about. This is the Alaska Airlines Center. And essentially we would, in a real emergency, we actually brought the bus in right here where we're taking the picture from, but there is the ability, we move two barriers and we can pull right to the front doors of this place. And we weren't on the main floor of the gym, just to make sure everybody, we were in what's called the practice gym. And here is this is inside the practice gym of the UAA Center. You can see we're just now deploying the cots and the equipment to set up the safety center, or excuse me, alternate care site. Another job. Here's our director being briefed by our admin log professional as far as where we're at in the process and what's going on. Once again, a lot of equipment, a lot of supplies. One thing it is a mobile unit, so pretty much everything we have is on wheels, so it can roll on and roll off of the trailers. Another view. We have 150 bed capability. When we tested this site, we figured out that probably the max and for the Alaska Airlines Center is 117 beds. So we weren't able to field the whole setup. Once again. There's our bus crew at the center, or at the care site. And then finally, as like I said before, I love this picture. I wasn't expecting this, but it's loving the crew. At the end of the day, it really boils down to the people that can do these things. Equipment gets stored and put away, but it's the folks that are trained and willing to actually execute the mission that make it all come together. And just to recap, another plug I would throw in for our crisis health action team. As far as I'm aware of right now, we're the only health department in the United States that has a program very similar to this, where we're specifically training and designating folks to perform emergency response roles. Matter of fact, my colleague Renee Aguilar last year went down to the national, it's NACCHO, I'll mess up the acronym, but gave a presentation about how we, the philosophy behind it, how we appointed folks, and how we trained them in order to fulfill this program under the Crisis Health Action Team. And so that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. I can answer your questions, and of course at any time if you have additional information or you'd like to talk about this and or the Anchorage Safety Center, you can give me a call or email me, of course.
I do have a question, Mr. Sard, but before I go, forget, since we're taking a pause here, Mr. Furman, Ira Furman is representing Mr. Hall. I forgot to say that Mr. Hall is excused, not available today. But thank you for being here, Mr. Furman. You can join us at the table if you'd like, if you have any questions or listening. Also joining us, Mr. Steele from the Assembly. For the moment, I think they may or may not be back, but I saw the mayor walk in, municipal manager Mike Abbott, and I believe the chief of staff, so we may or may not have him back. We'll see. Anyway, Mr. Train.
Mark, I appreciate what you showed us. My question is, where is the food component?
Well,
we got all these people. I appreciate you're going to take care of the medical needs, but we have to feed them.
Yes, sir. So under the mass care piece, like the sheltering, of course, we're looking at a couple different sources. There's catering, of course, but then we look at Salvation Army has basically stood up and said that they would support the municipality in feeding operations in multiple venues. This would be one of those venues. Also, we would probably, if there was a gap even after that, we would look to probably the Anchorage School District to be able to use their commercial kitchens and operations to help us with that feeding operation. Understanding that if school's in session or whatever, they have their priorities set out. So those are pretty much the three go-tos. Is first of all is going to be the Salvation Army feeding operation. Then we go to commercial contractors or caterers in the school district.
We've got an Alaska Shield. Have we ever done a component with feeding the people?
No, We have not. As a matter of fact, even on the, I'll clarify on the setup of the alternate care site, we went as far as to put all the equipment and everything into place. We did not actually receive patients into the facility.
Just an idea for next year when you do that, you might talk to the National Guard too.
We have tested that in the past,
You what?
we have tested that in the past.
Okay.
Past
It's good
exercise.
every now and then to keep testing it
Right.
because I appreciate you're taking care of your physical needs, but they're gonna wanna eat.
Yep.
Mr. Steele.
Is there a stockpile of ready to eat,
MREs.
out of the basin or something? And do we have agreements with them?
I mean, I'll turn it over to Rob. I'm not aware of what's in.
No, as far as the base, they have their own stockpile, but if we needed that, we could tap into it. But we don't have, say, a mutual aid agreement or anything for that.
I have any other questions? And so a couple quick, just as more comments, so I know for a matter of time, I won't get too deep into it, but on the communications, I made an observation from the active shooter side, when you're bridging and connecting, sometimes it sounds a bit digital, so as they're starting to talk, it screeches and you hear a little bit of talking like they're a robotic or something, it's not really clear. Did the bridge connect to the DHS folks with police and fire, or was that on a separate set of accounts?
So in this particular exercise, we were not communicating directly with police and fire on this. Basically, our communication links were with the local hospital and the alternate care site and our departmental operations center and the EOC hospital liaison desk. So it was pretty straightforward.
And was there any of that communications, that digital noise that comes across when you try to patch through, or was it all pretty clear?
Not noticeable to the point where it was disrupting operations.
Very good. The other thing is state involvement. We had the feds involved, we had the local agencies involved. Was there any state involvement at the?
Yes, there was, and once again, my flywheel chart there shows how we connect up to the Department of Health and Social Services Emergency Operations Program. That was our link in this particular exercise.
Okay, and then lastly, and we used to have emergency shelters and stuff set up at schools, but are the schools on the list, as you say, pre-designated areas just in case?
They are.
Okay, very good. I think that's it for now, Mr. Broussard, but we do have an issue on the agenda, new business, and then, of course, Ms. Freeman, if there's any other issues that you need to address from the health department, please.
Joe, thank you very much. Mark, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Train, any questions?
Sure, we have an item coming from the Senate on Title 17
Yes.
relative to dogs, liability. I'm gonna ask the clerk to call a work session on that, just to let you know.
Okay.
Because there's some discussion on the assembly members, what does this entail? And I noticed it was convoluted because the Daily News didn't even get it right. I read the article in the paper, the assembly wants to take control of this. It's not the assembly. This is coming from the administration asking us to look at it.
Yes, we've been working internally with the concern that was voiced on Tuesday evening. We've been working with the legal department to try to refine it.
Just to let you know, my clerk will be in.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chip.
I was working with Bill, and we reached an agreement, so I think it's ready to go. I saw it on the agenda for the next week.
Thank you very much. All right, so we'll just get back into the agenda items then. If there's nothing else from the body, any questions? Okay. Police, Chief Shaw.
Yes, sir. You asked for reports on two items. The first one, the academy updates. We have received approximately 32 applications for the two postings for the lateral academy, which starts May 23rd, 2016. And at the present time, it looks like we're going to have 5 individuals lateral-wise. The second one is the 16-2, which starts June 20th. There were 920 applications received by APD, and of those, 65 are still in the process. So we're really shooting for a full academy of 28, and maybe even a few additional slots if we can manage it in.
Sorry, Chief, what was that date again?
That is beginning on June 20th, 2016.
Thanks, sir.
And then there is a job posting that opened for 16-3. It began April 6th and it runs through August 31st, 2016, and that's for the December 9th academy. Some applications are starting to come in on that as well.
Chief, if you don't mind, on that area, we have an academy underway, nearing completion.
Yes, sir.
When would that graduation be?
Next month, I believe.
If we can get noticed, I'm sure we typically get an invite or something, graduation.
Yes, sir.
Anything else you?
You had asked for first quarter budget adjustments. We talked about that last time. The police department won't be asking for any adjustments or revisions for this first quarter 16.
No unexpected cost that might hit you between January and today? I understand there's some maintenance issue going on with some.
No, sir.
Everything will be within the budget?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any questions?
I have
Mr. Johnson?
Chief, if, I know it's a little bit difficult to predict attrition amongst officers and retirements and that kind of thing, but if you get the full 28, that new full academy, and they all graduate, or almost all of them graduate, what will that bring our total force number up to?
So our goal with the recruiting and nutrition for 2016, even though they won't be on the street, our goal is to try to get it up to 400 this year, or as close to it as we can. Now, unfortunately, we went years without having any academy classes. The ones that are just now coming out of field training these past few weeks, we've had, from the first academy class in 15, we've had 15 of them complete field training, so they're solo now, and they're starting to supplement the patrol division, and there's still some in training, as well as there's academy classes getting ready to graduate, 15-2, that's another 19 individuals. Despite those are partial classes, despite those 2 academy classes, we still lost more net last year. That's why it's so important that we get full classes, at least 2 of them, as well as do our best on these laterals. And we are going to make probably another attempt after we get the 16-1 lateral class started to look to see if there's any other laterals out there that we could possibly get.
Where are you getting most of the lateral hires from?
Yes, sir. They're all Alaska Police Standard Council certified officers. So the accreditation to be a police officer, a law enforcement officer in the state of Alaska, we all share that same accreditation, no matter if you're an APD officer or if you're a trooper or Juno and so on. So with that certification, what we're going to do is not a full academy class. Those laterals are coming in for a 2-week orientation. And then after they get done with the orientation, they'll go right into the modified field training. During that 2-week orientation, they'll learn Muni code, we'll qualify them at firearms, they'll learn our policies and procedures, uniforms, vehicles, things like that. And we expect them to move out of the field training much quicker than a normal recruit.
So our lateral hires are all coming from in-state,
Alaska.
not from out of state?
That's correct. If you are, a number of our officers are from other departments, LAPD and various other departments, they go through the full academy class because they have to obtain the certification by the state.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Trinker?
Chief, by tonight, or at least by Tuesday when we certify, we're gonna know Birdwood status. What I'd like to have from you is what are the contingency plans based on how the Birdwood vote goes. I don't want it today, but I do want to know where our contingency plans are. Because if there's an active shooting, they would have to send an officer down there, but beyond that, how can we respond? Because they're not in our service here, but they're still citizens of the city of Akron.
Yes, sir.
So it's just not now, but when we find out what the vote is tonight, at least by certification, you let us know.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chief.
Any other questions, Chief? Chief, along that line, it's something that this body would likely have to join. I'm not sure legal would have to give an authority whether or not it's even authorized. If it comes to it, people that are still in the boundaries of the municipality of Anchorage, but not in the police service area, I know that for the fire service, it's not it's not unheard of to hear of a service plan like a gym membership. So you're not paying taxes, but you're paying a service plan. So you're essentially maybe getting creative and you're paying a monthly service plan in case of the need for it. So maybe that's something this body would have to entertain if people are interested. I've heard horror stories of fire departments and particularly volunteer fire departments going to the property line and watching a house that's on the other side burn. Or if you're not a member of that service, having that service plan fee, you haven't paid the service plan fee. So this is something that we have to get creative until it comes down to it, because I don't know where the troopers are actually going to fall. Obviously, their budget concerns are really great.
Yes, sir.
Okay, nothing else, we'll move on to, I didn't see Mr. Frost. Anybody from code enforcement representing Mr. Frost? All right, we'll move on. Fire Department, Chief LeBlanc. Sir.
Yep, thank you. We've got a lot going on at the fire department, all good. The academy continues, they're in about week 3.5. 23 started, 23 is still there. Answer the question that you asked of Chief Tolley, we started with about 374 firefighters, men and women. Probably gonna lose about 5% this year, and then we hope to graduate all 23, but typically we'll lose 2 to 3 in the academy to various reasons. So even if we lost 3, would be at 380, which is the +5 to 6 that we're looking for. So that's going extremely well. In fact, this evening, we have what we call is family night. We invite all of the spouses and families in of the recruits, and we have a big sort of open house potluck. And then at some point during the evening, we take the spouses and family into a private room away from the academy recruits and explain to them the demands that we're placing on them and this type of support that they need at home to be successful. We've been doing this for every academy. It's very, very powerful, very enlightening, and both my wife and I will be attending that this evening. I'm looking forward to that.
Chief, had a quick question, Ms. Bridget.
Mr. Chairman, no, I don't have a question for the chief, but I just wanted to make a point that we overlooked one subject matter under the health department.
Yeah, I was gonna get back to that.
Yeah, that was my concern.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The second, probably most notable issue was the announcement that we made this week of the addition of 2 BLS units. I think we flooded the news media with live shots, stand-up interviews, Nixle press releases, official press releases. And what happened there is from 2002 to 2015, the number of transports that the Anchorage Fire Department has experienced is over 70% growth. We have added a couple of ambulances over the years, but the surge of medical calls in 2015 with the associated near burnout of the first responders, particularly out of Station 1, caused us to do something different. We had to approach it in a different manner. And working with the administration, with the support of the union and the Anchorage Fire Department command staff, we came up with a proposal at no net cost. Again, like the police department, we don't have any first quarter budget revisions. That was a commitment that we made to the city manager last year. So what we've done is we're taking existing resources from the slower stations and we're rotating them into Station 1 on a schedule whereby we'll have 6 additional people at Station 1 and they will be staffing the new BLS units called Medic 81 and Medic 82. Working with Dr. Levy, our medical director, the EMS battalion chiefs have rescheduled our computer-aided dispatch programs, recognizing that so many of the runs, based upon the type of incident, really don't require a paramedic. And quite frankly, we don't have enough paramedics to staff these additional ambulances, so that's why we're staffing them with EMTs. All firefighters are EMTs. Some EMT 1, EMT 2, EM3 3. So there'll be excellent medical services. But if you have somebody, for example, who has a near syncope episode at a Walmart, and we're called to respond, that doesn't need a paramedic. That person could be assessed. That person could express interest in going to the hospital for further evaluation, and quite safely and responsibly, that person could be transported in a BLS unit. Station 1 is I guess, the victim of a lot of demographic changes, because the second issue is concentration. Station 1 alone sees about 21% of the total calls that we receive in Anchorage. Station 3 to the east, Station 4 to the south, and Station 5 to the west help in those responses, but still Station 1, 21% of all of our calls. And at the peak, we've had 25 calls in one day, and that's the burnout concern. Particularly when they respond to the scene, they do the mitigation that they can at the scene, they transport the person to the hospital, they have to do their paperwork, then they have to clean the ambulance, and it starts all over again. So sleep deprivation, lack of you know, just the ability to function properly was a great concern of ours. So that's why, again, we're implementing the 2 BLS, or positioning the 2 BLS units at Station 1. They'll be able to respond throughout the city if needed, but their main focus will be the downtown, Mountain View, Government Hill area, extending through Town Square and those particular areas. The third, and I touched on this, the third reason why we're doing this is the type of calls. Probably 2 to 3% of our calls are high acuity, what we call status 1, code red. These are people who are suffering life-threatening cardiac issues or trauma, and all of the resources available are dedicated to that particular patient and transporting them successfully to the hospital. Status 2, which can be an emergent trauma situation, but one that is needed to get the patient to the hospital fairly quickly, runs about 5 to 10% of our calls. So you can see that 80 to 85% of our calls really involve BLS. In the Anchorage Fire Department, it's a bit of a misnomer. We're not really a fire department. If 85% of our calls are medicine, we're really an emergency medical department that does occasional structure firefighting. So we have to be prepared for both. So sort of a vernacular is we're the Anchorage Fire Department, but we're EMS heavy. And so, again, that implementation of the 2 additional ambulances occurs Monday. We're going through extensive training. A lot of credit goes to the maintenance department. They were able to take 2 reserve rigs that were parked over at the training maintenance shop, completely refurbish and upfit them so they're 24/7 ready. And those will be, again, Medic 81 and Medic 82. And much credit to Dr. Levy, the EMS battalion chiefs, for revising the computer-aided dispatch protocols so that we can send the appropriate resources at the appropriate time. Third thing of note, of course, is we implemented April 1st a municipal-wide burn ban. Everybody from the Department of Forestry down through our forester and our battalion chiefs that are dedicated to wildland firefighting, very, very concerned. We saw in the paper the first quarter of 2016, warmest quarter on record. We've been breaking records every day, temperature-wise. We had the small incident down on McHugh Creek about a week ago, which interestingly enough is outside of the Anchorage Fire Service area. But much like the inlet, Coast Guard's responsible. They don't have a boat. Somebody calls 911, we will try to go. But very quickly in a wildland, Department of Forestry, Division of Forestry will take over. And they're actually the ones that made the call to not try to go into that scene at night. 2 miles up the trail, bears are awake. We had no business being there. So we did pull back, and DOF took it over for the next couple of days. There was a release yesterday, considering that we do have the burn ban, what's the alternate resource? The woodlots. We spent a lot of time this winter working with Solid Waste Services and ensuring that the woodlot at C Street and 100th would be open and ready for functioning. The woodlots in Girdwood and Eagle River will be open. That message went out yesterday. I think there was an article in the paper on that. So that's all good. And of course that will help mitigate some of the wildland fire potential. And in that regard, we've reinitiated, or we have initiated for this year, the home inspections. We've got 4 fire stations that are assisting the forester in doing the wildland home fire inspection. And we're going to have I think it's April 24th, there'll be that folded flyer on the front of the ADN, which will have a message from the mayor and all of the instructions to all the people who get the newspaper, and there'll be flyers elsewhere explaining how they can make their home fire-wise. And we've also outfitted all of the brush rigs and the engine companies that service the hillside with the wildland fighting material. So we feel we're ready, but we're very nervous. In that regard, Rob knows on April 21st, we have the Division of Forestry and the Matsu EOC manager come in to brief us on the lessons learned from the Sockeye fire. They had their plans ready, but as you know, you recall, that Sockeye fire took off. So when we met with them in Vassou a couple of weeks ago, we said, okay, you had a plan. What did you learn that needs to be done differently, or what surprised you? So Casey Cook is coming in on the 21st, and we'll have a great working session to understand how our plan needs to be modified, or at least how we need to be prepared for the unexpected.
Chief, I have a question, Mr. Evans.
Yeah, it's going back briefly to the BLS issue, Chief. And I know I'll probably get, even for bringing the issue up, I'm sure Mike and the guys at the union may send me hate mail, but given the fact that you stated that, you know, really primarily you are a medical response agency, given it's 7% or so for the calls of that, has there been any long-term analysis done to look into whether a different schedule for the guys, especially the guys running the non-fire equipment rigs, is more appropriate? Because I know that the 24-on Kelly Days situation is difficult when you're running calls for the full 24 hours.
There is indeed an alternate schedule that's being considered. It's called the 4896. Implementation would not be anytime soon. It's a very difficult schedule to implement, particularly across 13 fire stations with nearly 400 people. But when we did a survey last fall about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for the fire department, as an opportunity, the 4896 shift schedule was suggested. We've got quite a bit of detail of departments throughout the United States that have implemented that schedule, and that's a very real opportunity for us. I don't know how easily implementable it will be, or if we will go to it, but you're absolutely right. We are considering alternate schedules.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Ms. Freeman, we missed one opportunity for you to speak on the agenda. And Mr. Jackson, thank you so much for this.
Can I do one redo? Mark mentioned it, May 14th is the annual open house over at the training center for the Anchorage Fire Department. Lots of good food, lots of good time. Please attend.
Thank you, Jim.
And while you're writing down dates, I looked on my calendar for the date of the academy graduation, if you'd like me to provide it.
Yes, please do.
That's going to be May 12th, and it's at the UAA Wendy Williamson Auditorium. And that's for Academy Class 15-2.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
We'll make sure you get
How many
invitations
people,
also.
Chief?
Sure.
How many people?
I believe our count right now in that class is 18 or 19.
Thank you. Ms. Freeman, going back to you briefly, the first quarter budget revisions, do you expect any needs?
We don't have needs related to public safety for DHHS for the first quarter budget revisions. We're running a pretty tight shift, and so I think we're doing okay. We still haven't heard from the state about what some of their revenues would be from the state of Alaska, especially a public health nursing grant, but we will keep you posted. So we're okay for now.
Mr. Jackson?
No, please, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I know we had, last year, for this budget here, we added the 3 animal control.
One animal control officer, yes, was one. I think we discussed
like to have
3
3,
at
but we
one
settled
point,
for
but
1.
we received 1. And then you also had approved the expansion and the increase of the budget for the safety center and safety patrol, and that has been very well utilized and I think very appreciated by our contractor. We're doing an
Anything else?
excellent job.
Mr. Fitch, thank you for being here we probably covered Alaska Shield. Do you have any to add?
Very much, they took all my thunder. Nothing, but I'd like to touch on, though, on Alaska Shield. I wanted to thank the Department of Health, and especially Mark and his team. They did a fabulous job. We had really good communications with the hospitals, got great training out of that. The setting up the alternate care site was fantastic. Also, one thing about Alaska Shield this time that was really different was APD's involvement. Usually our exercises are designed around things that APD cannot really participate in. So this time having an active shooter and then going to APD and giving it to them, and they jumped in 12 feet, and it was great training, and I appreciate everybody that came out and worked with us for that, and so that worked out really good. Again, wildfire, as Chief touched on, we're preparing for the wildfire season. We know that we had a dry winter, so we're a little nervous about the wildfire this season, and we do have training today, a pre-setup for the April 21st training event. So we're working heavily on that. One thing we are doing, we're actively going out to the community and asking churches and facilities, private facilities, if they desire to be a shelter in times of crisis. And so far, we've gotten really good response back from a lot of the churches. So it looks like we'll have a good setup of, we'll have to go out and inspect the facility, and then we also provide training to the facility itself on preparedness and what they can expect if there is a shelter. So we're doing that.
Well, from my perspective, and from as a learning environment, and I didn't get involved in the DHS and the mass casualty and the ambulance portion, but from the active shooter, I was on a perimeter that the day before, and I think the chief can verify, in Virginia, they actually had an active shooter a training exercise, and then an oh my gosh, real person coming in with a gun and shot and killed a state trooper who was he was part of the perimeter for that exercise as well. So the FBI was very keenly concerned, and they actually brought in some extra agents who were armed and could intervene if possible. But I can tell you that for all practical reality, the event happened on the campus, including the schools. We have SROs, and we certainly have the Anchorage or the University Police has a small contingent on duty at any given time. But it would be an all-in. Everybody would have to participate, and Chief's correct in trying to communicate on the same channel, and I think Mr. Lassard mentioned it too. It's very difficult. It's not easily done on the fly, so it takes a little bit of time, and then when everybody gets there, sometimes that communication sounds a little different than it would if you're talking amongst each other in the same system. So very well done exercise, a lot of lessons learned, and communication is key. So thank you very much. Nothing else, we'll move into old business. Thank you, Mr. Wood, for sitting through and listening to these reports. An update briefly on the secondhand precious metals and metal recycling.
So does everybody have this handout that's called Scrap Metal Dealer Record Requirements? It's a copy of the Alaska state law on this. Do you need any more? There's some right at the end there. So I just got into this last week, and Mr. Holman and I talked a little bit yesterday. Thank you. So I was going to go through the state statute and then just throw out a few ideas and get feedback from the assembly members, and then we can create ordinance in a little more detail. But anyway, in researching this, I learned that there is a fairly new state statute. As you can see, this is effective January 2015, so it did pass during the 2014 session, that directly deals with what I understand is the problem in part here, the stealing of, particularly of copper from building sites, things like that. And I did a little research myself just to see, because I heard these stories before, but how much is this going on? I came across a lot of very current stories around the country, including one where the thieves used a jackhammer to dig up wires from communication wires that served the school district. I forget where that was. I saw one that's happening in Guam. So this is the state of Alaska's effort to deal with that. So just walk through this, because what this does is basically it's addressing what might be referred to as attempts to fence stolen goods, in this particular case stolen scrap metal that has value. So the first part of this, 860-200, says that scrap metal dealers have to have records, and I won't go through it line by line, but it's very detailed in terms of getting information on the person or the company that's selling them this secondhand scrap metal. And so they have to keep this record. And then the second part on page 2, 862-10, they also have to get a signed statement from the person or the company selling them the scrap metal. And it's all based on if its value is $100 or more, saying that that is not stolen. So the whole idea is put the brakes on, take away the ability to make money off of stolen goods. In 220, then you see the dealer has to make the records available. It says for inspection by a law enforcement officer. Now, there are several different options. I'll just stop here for a minute in how we deal with it, since there's an existing statute, our police officers could go and inspect and write somebody up. And this is a misdemeanor if you violate this as a dealer. So that's one option, is just depend on this. And then, however, and Seneca Athena was here from the prosecutor's office, and we talked about this a little yesterday. Her office could not prosecute under state law. We would have to depend on state prosecutors to prosecute this. Another option you might want to think about, if we adapt this and make this part of our code, like we have many, many state statutes, so the prosecutor can prosecute, is that it be a violation rather than a crime, or it could be first offense is a violation, second offense is a crime. That work? She nodded. We also might want to say, and the police chief may want to weigh in on this, that a law enforcement officer or a code enforcement officer, because this would be the kind of thing that would fall under the licensing scheme of Title 10 that the clerk's office has to do with, and they have, I believe, a dedicated code enforcement officer, or at least they share one. So that's another thing to think about. Going on to the next section, 230 requires they keep the records for 5 years. 240 talks about exemptions. Basically, if it's a dealer that they routinely deal with, then they don't have to get this information every time. They would get it one time. You see on the third page, 250, as I said, it's a Class A misdemeanor if they don't have the record of the purchase and all that information that's in 200, or they don't have the signed statement in 210. And then the last section is definitions. So probably the one that was interesting to me, number 3, they define scrap metal there as used, discarded, previously owned brass, copper, bronze, aluminum, lead, stainless steel, so on and so on. And then it says in this paragraph, metal does not include ferrous metal, which would be any iron, presumably because that has little value out there. It's not worth stealing and trying to resell. Beverage containers, and then it says gold, silver, or platinum. Now, again, I understand that there's interest in, besides dealing with scrap metal, but secondhand jewelry sales, because that also is an avenue for fencing stolen goods. So we could potentially include jewelry in this. We would probably then talk about gold, silver, and platinum being part of this rather than excluded. Or maybe that would be a separate ordinance to deal with that kind of thing. And then I would say look at number 4. Interesting to me that they have a very broad definition of scrap metal dealer. A person who purchases scrap metal for the purpose of resale or processing. So in terms of who this record-keeping requirement applies to, it doesn't matter if it's your main business. It doesn't matter if you have a nice big yard, or if it's just something you do once or twice a year. The way I read this, it would apply across the board. Sales big or small, no matter what your business is like.
Mr. Sure, we have a question. Mr. Attorney did have a question, reference number 3.
Number 3, the state just goes right off the target and misses it completely. I would like you to come up with something that picks up gold, silver, platinum. I'm sorry, the state just missed the target.
And
add code enforcement, because I have no faith in the state of Alaska being able to police any of the concerns we have, given they can't even handle manicures in Alaska.
So transfer this into something in our code, include a code enforcement officer. One thing I was going to mention, I did look up, and the chief author of this bill was Mike Chenault, and I called their office yesterday to talk to a staffer to find out what was their thinking in excluding silver, gold, platinum, and just a little more background, and I hadn't heard back yet. I guess the other thing I might ask, just to get a sense of whether the preference is to go with this as a misdemeanor or violation, and Seneca might want to talk about that, because I know we've made that choice in other cases.
I'd probably, if you indulge the committee here. Ms. Stino, I thank you for being here. I know you've been in from the beginning, so thank you for that through. Under the omnibus bill where we were able to prosecute state crimes as municipal. If we don't have a municipal code that addresses this, can we prosecute this particular state crime as in the municipal court for prosecution?
No, sir, we have to bring it over into our code or adopt it by reference.
So you recommend we bring a code in that's mirroring this?
If we seek to prosecute this, then yes.
And what is your recommendation of, as Mr. Sherwood said, violation, then second offense perhaps, or third offense or something?
I think that depends primarily on who you want to do the enforcement. If we're looking at having code enforcement officers doing it, then I would recommend we do it as a civil citation with a civil fine. If we want the Anchorage Police Department to be focused on it, then we would do it as a criminal penalty. And we could choose to do it as a, just a fine only for a first or subsequent offense and increase to a misdemeanor at a later point if we'd like. The state does do that on some offenses.
So, is, Mr. Train?
Just the rapid burglaries that are going on Anchorage right now. We're seeing the jewelry going from somebody's house burglarized to a store, and some of the malls are actually selling secondhand jewelry. And they really don't care because they figure they're never gonna get caught. So, Todd, would you please fix that problem with jewelry? Because it's an epidemic right now.
I think
Nobody
the only thing we
at
need
Fort
to.
Heights, I can't tell how many burglaries go on there.
Mr. we got another quick question. Mr. Evans?
And I could completely misunderstand how the nature of the fencing operation runs in these, but it seems like scrap metal dealers typically are more industrial type of businesses that deal with a lot of these more industrial materials, and that's what the state was looking at. I think the issue Mr. Cheney's talking about with the burglaries of the precious metals typically go to businesses, pawn shops, secondhand stores that wouldn't necessarily consider themselves scrap metal dealers. Obviously, we can make a definition and make them scrap metal dealers, but then I think we'd have to have a sort of education thing to alert them to the fact that they are now scrap metal dealers under the act. But maybe it's better for a second ordinance that reaches secondhand stores, pawn shops, things that are more routinely used for selling stolen precious metals. Does that make sense?
It does, and I mentioned that a little bit, that in my thinking was, do we try to fold it all into one ordinance or two separate ordinances? I think it's probably better to have two separate ordinances, mirror the scrap metal one for scrap metal with a few changes we've talked about. We do already have a pawnbroker ordinance, so we might add to that, but have a separate one for, and we could just call it secondhand jewelry dealers, and then define that very broadly as they have scrap metal dealers here, so that it doesn't matter if it's your chief source of income, if it's your chief business, whether or not you have a state business license even. Simply, you have to keep track and you have to keep that record for 5 years, and if you don't, it's a violation, and here's the penalty.
That makes sense.
Mr. Train?
And then another question, just generally, kind of looking at this problem from the other side of things, or from the bottom up. Instead of having, at the lawyer end, us drafting regulations that kind of address this problem, I'd be interested in, from the police end of things. We know that there's a problem with this. It's been increasing. What the impediments are to the police department from getting convictions and enforcement, and make sure we get those incorporated into this, if there's
Sure.
any other things you're aware of.
I think it's very perceptive that there really is two different things going on here, with precious metals as well as like the copper thefts and so on. In 2015, we had 67 incidents reported of copper thefts. For some reason, it peaked during the months of August, September, and October, sort of leveled out in November, December, January, and then went back to the low norm. So far in 2016, we've had 12 incidents reported, so over that 15-month period, total of 79 thefts. Of course, if there's any way that we can tie these thefts into a resale center or something, they would be part of the crime itself. What's really helpful is to have their records and their information available so we can work on these criminal cases. And I do see that as a code type thing, record keeping and so on, as well as it discourages the thieves from utilizing these so legitimate resale and so on. So that would be really helpful. We have not taken the cases under the state statute. It's hard enough getting any type of cases, and this wouldn't be real high up on the priority, I don't think, right now with the state, so it'd be competing with all other type of investigations and so on. I would think it'd be rather difficult for a normal patrol officer to enforce that type of sort of code enforcement type activities. But the information that could be gained from it, just like we do gain a lot of information from pawn shops and so on, it helps us solve crimes. And the more accountability that's there, the more it helps us develop and work on the criminal cases, which really are separate from what you're looking to regulate. Thanks.
Mr. Dunn.
I have a question both for you, Chief, and for you, Todd. Do we have, or how many people do we have in Anchorage that consider themselves scrap metal dealers? I mean, are there people for whom this is their primary business? Is there any kind of licensing requirement? And I'm also sort of concerned by how broad this definition is. So if I were to buy aluminum siding from my friend, for example, and then later decide I'm going to sell it on Craigslist, am I now a scrap metal dealer? And how do we make sure that we're not sort of, sweeping up a bunch of normal citizens who don't think of themselves as this kind of dealer?
So my source for your first question is Mr. Honeman.
I know of three, Chief may know more. I know of three major industrial recyclers. Schnitzer's one, TCM I think is another, name escapes me, the third. One is, TCM is better than Schnitzer in that they do keep some records, but no one has ever really enforced, as I gathered, because they don't know even if they're required to even keep it or show it to an officer when they ask. There's been discussions on having to get search warrants, to get records. I mean, some of the stuff is a part of education, the other part of it is routine inspection. And this law was, I suspect, was written at the state level as a result of what we're continuing to get. The main electric companies, they're getting a lot of straight off the reel, brand new, not previously, I mean, I guess you could call it previously owned, but brand new off the reel copper wires being stolen by the real loads, even in sites on the substations as they're upgraded. But oftentimes it's construction sites where they're building large projects and such, and they're getting both the brand new stuff and the temporary power cords that run between, I'd say, a trailer, job trailer, and the generator or the power source or whatnot. And it's multiple. Just, the chief mentioned 67. I can tell you the UAA alone inside the municipality took another at least a dozen or more in and around our jurisdiction last year alone.
So isn't that fairly obviously stolen goods then at these places when they show up? If a normal person shows up with a giant reel of copper wire.
No, they don't bring it in like that. They'll cut it in smaller pieces and put it in buckets.
They burn the plastic.
And they burn the cable off, because if you bring it in a cable coated, it's less value. But if you burn or cut the cable off, strip it. And we did a search warrant in a home, and the whole living room area was coated in the stuff they were shucking off.
I can address your second part about concern about the definition. And it's one of those things that cuts two ways. As you know, any crime has elements, and each element would have to be proven if it stays a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. But either way, whether it's a crime or violation, it's going to have certain elements. The narrower the definition, and using the state definition for scrap metal dealer, the narrower that definition, the harder it is to prove, and the less effective this is going to be as a tool to stop the fencing, And just as an example, you could say scrap metal dealer means a person whose primary business is purchasing scrap metal. Then we got to say, well, what does primary business mean? They make their living. Then we got to dig into it. Becomes more invasive because we got to dig into their tax records and all of that kind of thing. So again, as Mr. Honeman and I were talking a little bit yesterday, and how, like with the jewelry kind of thing especially, but it could happen with this, you could sell it on Craigslist. And yet, that's potentially part of the problem. And so then I think you say, well, really, how burdensome is it, if you do it once or twice a year, and it's just a casual thing, to keep a note of that? And then realistically, is that where the code enforcement officer is going to go? No. police might, in an investigation, find something like that, but it's very unlikely that occasional type of thing is gonna impact the mild wildlife. That's just my thinking off the top of my head, but I take my direction from you folks.
When we reduce something from a misdemeanor to a citation, do we typically keep the same mens rea requirement?
They're usually strict liability at the violation level.
So that's my concern then, if we're more likely to sweep up because we have a lower mens rea requirement, we're more likely to sweep up the casual person.
They don't have to be, we can draft them with a particular mens rea, depending on the elements that are part of that violation.
And here, you see on the third page, it's knowingly standard, so.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, thank you, Mr. Sherwood. I think, as official act of the last, probably last as the chair, going forward, I just make the recommendation, Mr. Trainee recommended, that we do look at the precious metals. You're recommending a second ordinance, the body, is that, you think concurrence is likely a second ordinance is necessary rather than to try to include in this? I'd also recommend, Ms. Nino's suggestion, we have a second ordinance, or ordinance that pertains to both of this, so it could be prosecuted locally rather than having to rely on the stretched resources of the DAs. And then if there's any other input, I don't know what the time input, Mr. Chair, and the new chair might ask. I don't know if it's urgent enough that, if you have other pressing matters ahead of you you're dealing with.
When would I think it would be good to come back to this committee with 2 draft ordinances. What's the timeframe for meeting again?
We meet monthly. Mr. Evans may, we're gonna get that in a minute. He may schedule meetings on a different day or time of day, but, based on the schedule. We meet monthly. I don't know, Mr. Evans, do you think next month or?
Yeah, I have no plans of changing the schedule, so next month.
I could have a draft available, and we'll look at other things like, do we need to add a line or two to the pawnbroker ordinance on this? And then, I would recommend, as we discussed, adding code enforcement officer, but keeping law enforcement officer, not with the idea they're gonna be going around, but if they're doing an investigation of stolen goods, and they go to a scrap metal dealer and say, I need to look at your records, and they say, oh, we don't have it, they can immediately deal with that right then and there.
Thank you. All right, with that, Ms. Train?
Todd, when you get a draft, send it to me a copy by email.
Sure.
I want to pursue this. I've got whole community councils up in arms over the burglaries and the theft goes on.
Okay.
Thank you.
We do have-
But the goal will be, have it for the next meeting?
A draft, of course. Mr. Evans, yes, sir. So, in light of our agenda items that's left, and we do have lunch, by the way, coming in shortly. If you want to grab something now, great. Otherwise, shortly. We do have some pretty important items that we'll be covering. This meeting may go a little longer, just to give fair warning ahead of time. And then secondly, we do have a meeting starting at noon for the first quarter budget year, so it has to go well before then. I'm going to move item A on the new business down behind D, if there's no objection. So Mr. Abbott, municipal manager, would like to address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring the committee up to date on a concern that we're having regarding personnel issues at both the police and the fire department. For I think a couple of reasons, one of which I want to talk about today. We are having a hard time recruiting folks to apply for promotion to commander level positions in the police and fire department. What I'm talking about are lieutenants and battalion chiefs right now. To a lesser degree, captains and assistant chiefs also. Those are the respectively next highest positions in those 2 organizations. I'd like to share with the committee some information that I think describes this. I think there may be a number of reasons, but clearly compensation is one of them. And we've gotten that feedback from individuals that we've essentially asked, why didn't you apply for these promotional opportunities? And they described that they didn't want to take in some cases, the 20–30% pay cut that they might be otherwise asked to take. what the data before you shows is we've identified 6 senior fire captains. These are the 6 most senior fire captains and the 8 most senior police sergeants. I haven't included their names here, but these are real people. And you can get the first 5 or 6 columns is sort of the gobbledygook that gets to the colored columns, which, just to briefly describe, in 2015, you can see the base salary, if you will, for those 14 folks. And then in the second blue column, you can see their actual 2015 wages. This is what they were paid as a result of other pay increments that they were due, educational bumps, overtime, specialty pay, things like that. So as you can see, that senior sergeants and senior fire captains earn a lot more than their base pay, which was always intended and expected. These are all unionized employees. These are direct results of the contracts that we've all been working on for decades now. Then in the far right-hand column, you can see that as it's currently set, these are the wages that those individuals would get if they promoted. So if the top 6 folks became battalion chiefs and the second group of 8 sergeants became police lieutenants, these would be their wages going forward. There's a little bit of variety between them because things like service recognition and other things affect that, and different people get different amounts for that. But as you can see, it's no great mystery why someone that's making, 160, 70, even upwards of $180,000 a year in their current capacity would necessarily be interested in a promotion that leads to a big diminution in their actual wages. So that's the quandary that we're facing. And I'm not here today with a solution. We are working on a number of options, but none that are ready for you to be presented with yet. But the police department recently recruited for lieutenants, or posted for lieutenants back in February, I believe. Essentially had no internal applicants. And, you don't have to be a math major to kind of understand why. And it's not to say that these are exactly the people that we would, that would make the best lieutenants, but it's kind of the community of folks that we would expect to at least be applying for these jobs, and that we would want to have considered for these jobs. So we will be coming back to the committee and the assembly generally with some suggestions for how to move forward on this, but we wanted to at least give the committee a heads up that we have a sort of a directional problem that we need to address one way or the other in order to fill positions. I think we have 5 current lieutenant vacancies at the police department right now, 5 out of 14.
6 vacancies.
6 out of 14 vacancies. In those cases, we have sergeants acting as lieutenants. That's not a long-term solution, and one that we believe we need to take steps on this compensation front in order to make a difference and make these positions more attractive. We absolutely have to have lieutenants. I believe all of the VC positions are currently filled, but in the last round, I think we had 1 applicant.
Correct.
For the most recent VC vacancy. So not an ideal circumstance there either.
Mr. Chair, we have a question, Mr. Evans?
No, more of a comment. I appreciate that, Mike. I've heard this issue before. Hopefully it's not gonna, I don't know what stage you are at getting a solution. Hopefully it shouldn't be that far out. I mean, I think it's a very difficult, people aren't gonna be happy when they see that the end result of this is certain people, there's gonna be a big, looks like a big raise increase for certain people in the police department. But the fact is, we've created this system over time, and it is broke at this level, and we have to fix it. And really, unless there's more brilliant solutions that I'm aware of, the only way of fixing it is to actually increase the compensation for these promoted positions so that there is an incentive to take them, so we get the best people into those positions, because otherwise you're really gonna have far more costly problems. So I just hope that it's something will be coming forth quickly, and I'll be glad to.
Thank you. And
join
I,
in that effort.
and the tentative plan would be to come back to you with ideas, next month. So, and I also wanted to mention, the sergeant and senior fire captain pay rates are not out of sync with what, regional or national averages would indicate. So it's not like we're overpaying folks at one end of the system. These are, you know, you can, depending on how you compare, we're either at or just below sort of median pay rates for these kind of positions, on the West Coast. So that's just the state of play that we're in right now. And that's all that we were hoping to do today, Mr. Chairman, was just bring the committee up to speed and sort of give you some heads up that we will be talking, we will be recommending options going forward.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I just presume that, that we've had to increase the bottom end in order to recruit, and that's how things have gotten out of line, that they have, but, one way or another, it's you know, you gotta fill it, and, I assume we're not paying too much at the bottom end.
No, I believe the union workforce is paid at or around the median for, and, you know, there's a different position, slightly different, the rate of growth in positions, but the data I've seen suggests that we're at or below the median for West Coast, Western police forces of our size.
See the solution.
Thank you. Any other questions of Mrs. Bonner? Okay. And Mr. Abbott, I appreciate the input. I suspect going forward, you'll be approaching the assembly with some process or something explaining what it would take to.
Yeah, the lieutenants and battalion chiefs and captains and assistant chiefs are all non-reps, so to speak, in our sort of terminology around here. Changing their compensation requires code changes. So that is the most likely vehicle that will be bringing you to address this.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott, I appreciate that. I kind of lean to the colleagues to my left, you'll be bringing them in. That's the reason, thank you. Anything else further on that? Seeing none. Mr. Mitchell, I believe you're here. Mr. Mitchell? Fred Mitchell?
Yes.
I know you got here early on the meeting, and I don't want you to think that we're not wanting to listen to your presentation. We're technically ending the meeting, but we're going to extend if there's no other concerns. We want to hear your concerns. Can you be fairly succinct on your presentation about the problem you're addressing? Thank you. Come on up if you'd like, introduce yourself. If you want to bring a chair, we can move one up to you if you need it.
I have some documentation for community members.
If it's all the same, just put it down in front of Mr. Steele and pass it around. Okay. If you'd like to take a seat at the end of the table there, you'd like, sure. Oh, there you go, right there. Right here, you want. Okay. Okay, if you could just tell us, we'll catch the faithful as we go along, what's the concern and what you'd like to see done?
Okay. My name is Alhaji Frederick Mitchell, and I've lived in Anchorage for 12 years. My educational background is in biological sciences, and I work in food safety and sanitation throughout the state of Alaska from Adak to Ketchikan, with occasional right turns up to Bethel and Nome. I also have field research experience spanning nearly 4 decades, which mostly focused on population and distribution studies of several fish and wildlife species. Since about 1971, I've monitored impacts of human engendered introductions of animal and plant species into environments where they did not naturally occur. Feral cats, Felis catus, have proved to be one of the most destructive invasive species in the world, both in terms of public health and wildlife conservation. My focus today is public health. On April 4th, I found an online article which I copied from Shannon Bosner, president of Mojo's Hope, a local nonprofit, quote-unquote, animal welfare organization in which she not only declared her intention to promote and perpetuate unrestrained feral cat colonies in Alaska, including Anchorage, but in which she admitted individuals associated with or allied with her group were in fact illegally maintaining such colonies. I have copies of her article for committee members in the documentation I gave you, made shortly before Mojo's Hope deleted the pages from their website. I immediately contacted Anchorage Animal Control Officer John Lees, and he verbally confirmed that private individuals maintain outdoor feral cat colonies along Spenard Road, and that he had previously encountered individuals with Mojo's Hope in connection with these colonies. There's another feral cat group called Clear Creek Cat Rescue, with an office in Anchorage, and which also maintains feral colonies in the Mat-Su Valley, apparently adjacent to one or more trailer courts. While not in Anchorage jurisdiction, this is nonetheless a violation of State Regulation 5 AAC 92.029, permit for possessing live game, which prohibits releasing domestic animals, including cats, into the wild. Members of this group admitted on their webpage and once to me personally that they're propagating these colonies. I have also seen online photos of them. Both these groups advocate a fraudulent campaign known as TNR, Trap, Neuter, Release, in which feral cats are trapped, sterilized, and sometimes vaccinated for rabies, and then returned to where they were trapped and released. However, only the first rabies vaccination is normally given, as the cats become trap shy and it's difficult to recapture them to administer the required booster shots. The initial vaccination is only good for 1 year. Cats have become the most frequent rabies vector among domestic animals, primarily due to misguided no-kill programs like TNR, which combined with irresponsible cat feeding and cat dumping has enabled the U.S. feral cat population to double in a little more than 2 decades.
Mr. Mitchell?
Yeah.
So it looks like you're reading from the packet you've distributed to our committee.
Actually, no, I've kind of changed it a lot.
Can you, I think we get the gist of what you're at. Can you suggest what you think our committee or this assembly can do to address
What the top page is the copy of the article by Ms. Bossner, in which she says that she has contacted the governor's office, the State Department of Fish and Game Permitting Office, and members of the Anchorage Assembly, asking them to set aside Anchorage Municipal Ordinance 17, which prohibits releasing feral cats into the wild, or prohibits releasing cats into the wild or maintaining them there, and that she plans on inflicting these invasive vermin on our communities in by 2017. And my urgent request is that you deny her applications to modify existing regulation prohibiting the release of domestic animals, including cats, into the wild, primarily for public health concerns. 350 people a year die from diseases carried by feral cats.
Ms. Freeman, we had a question.
Ms. Freeman, I've not seen anything come forward to the Assembly, and I've been on the Assembly for a few years. My question is, has that come in front of the Animal Control Board? And if it has, didn't they refer to state law, I think it says you cannot release feral cats? Tell me where we're at with this thing.
Yes, I don't know. I'd have to get back to you to see if it's been addressed with the Animal Care and Control Advisory Board, what the response has been. I wrote down the name of the officer that responded to your concern, and I'll do further research and provide you with an overview of what has occurred related to feral cats within the last year.
So, Mr. Mitchell, Ms. Freeman is the director over, she has multiple sections of her department, and she oversees animal care and control. They also have an advisory board, and I would encourage you to perhaps get on their agenda to come speak and give them the presentation, probably so that they can make recommendations to our assembly, and we will look. Please stay in touch with, I believe Ms. Gray Jackson was the one that requested you in there. Please stay in touch with whomever your assembly persons are, and of the department and the care control industry.
If you'd like to come and talk to the full Assembly, contact our clerk. Her number is 343-4311. Her name's Barbara Jones. And tell her you'd like to have an appearance request in front of the Assembly. And that would be at 6 o'clock on the agenda.
That's
Just talk
today
to
or?
No, it'll be probably the 26th or another meeting after that.
Okay.
And like I said, we've had nobody ask us to receive feral cats. There's lots of people that said, "Well, I've talked to them." In reality, they've been talking to mirrors themselves.
Oh, okay, well, that's, you know, I pulled this, you know, I guess what caught my attention after I pulled this is that, that it was immediately taken off their webpage as well, so.
Well, it's good
I
to
mean,
know
the
that.
link is still, is at the top of, it's on that, the top page of.
Looks like it's a Facebook post.
Yeah, I think so, I think it's what it was.
Well, contact Barbara, because then she'll come to me for approval. I don't have a problem with you come speak to us.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. We'll definitely be listening or waiting to hear back from the results from this Clemens Research Center. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell.
All right, thank you.
All right, next is Mr. Pete Burns, and thank you, Mr. Burns, for coming in. I know you were at a similar meeting a couple of meetings back.
Yep.
And you wanted to talk about a concern.
Yep.
Can you just identify yourself for recording it and just give us.
Pete Burns, downtown resident, director of operations for Humvees, Sub-Zeros, Blow Off, Flat Top, all of the operations right next door to City Hall. I've known Mr. Harmon for, if I don't know the decor, what I should be addressing him as, I'm just gonna say I've known Paul for 15 years or so. My concern is I grew up in the city of Memphis. Memphis is a very deadly city, very dangerous city. And my concerns that I've shared with Paul is, we're part of a downtown trade group, Anchorage Downtown Partnership. Over the last 5-6 years that I've been working with them, we constantly talk about how we can improve downtown safety, how we can improve late night public safety. And I think we're missing the boat on what really is happening downtown. It's not downtown public safety at night, it's public safety in general downtown. I got a hit in the face a couple years ago, someone very close to me, end of April, was walking home to the house, picked up, ended up being kidnapped and raped. Trial just ended, wasn't even a trial. She didn't want to go through a trial, she agreed to let the prosecutors have it. The person ended up getting almost 40 years. If that had happened to a tourist, we'd probably have a 10% reduction in our tourism group for downtown. When I travel, and I travel a ton, I travel based on safety. I don't travel based on the cost. And when I was at one of the downtown partnership meetings, they brought up the cost of, well, to get additional police officers down there for us, in this downtown environment, it would cost $1.2 to $1.3 million a year. And if you go into these meetings, the people that are in those meetings are restaurant and bar people. It's not the law offices over here. It's not whatever else business is downtown. It's a very select group of people that are in that thing, and it's almost like a person. There's no way that these businesses can pony up $1.2 million. It won't happen. It can't happen. My concern is there's a notion that what's going on downtown is downtown's problem. And the reason I wanted to bring it to the assembly is you're an Anchorage Assemblyman, you encompass everyone. A lot of business owners are South Anchorage, a lot of business owners are Eagle River, all over the place. It needs to be a concerted effort to address the problem. And when talking with the downtown partnership, one of the things that came up, and I know it's the T word that everyone gets all pissed off about, and I agree, taxes. They said they're funded through taxes. They come from the assessment, yes. And then I asked, I said, well, how's Visit Anchorage funded? And they said through hotel taxes, or ACDB. And I said, well, what prevents anyone from assessing a 1% public safety usage service charge to every hotel room in this town? 1%, it's $1.50 per stay. No one's going to cancel their trip. No one's going to cancel their vacation for an additional $5 or $6 on a trip. However, that 1% over the 10,000 hotel rooms at 80% occupancy for a year is going to equate to $3 million. That would more than meet the budgetary needs for providing for downtown. It would probably additionally add additional enforcement officers to this area. Where I grew up in Memphis, police officers were walking in your business. They were coming in and saying hi. We are strapped right now. We don't have that. I would rather have the relationships with police officers when you walk in and go, hey, how's it going? What's going on? And tell me about what's going on in the community, and us tell them about what's going on in our environment. Currently in our environment, I've seen in the last 3 to 4 weeks, 6 members of our staff either assaulted or robbed or various incidents take place in the downtown core. I park in the parking garage right there, and going to the car at 3 o'clock at night is a challenge. I have seen people urinate on City Hall, I've seen people urinate on our building in broad daylight, I've seen people defecate in front of businesses on the sidewalk at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Something needs to be done, because my fear is what's taking off with the oil industry is small potatoes if we lose the bread and butter, which is the tourism industry for downtown and for the state. The Humvees will be fine, the Humvees business will always be fine, but knowing that we keep creeping up these lists of dangerous places to be, dangerous places of what's going on in violent crime, if something doesn't happen, I fear that Anchorage is gonna lose that destination, location, place in people's hearts to where, well, it's too dangerous to go to Anchorage, I'm just gonna head back down to Seattle for the end of my trip as opposed to stay in Anchorage for 1 or 2 days. It's a beautiful place, and a pittance of $1.50 to $2 per person per visit to the state of Alaska to allow these guys with Spice and all the stuff that's going on downtown to possibly have more resources. I saw they're putting 2 new fire department vehicles downtown for that reason alone, to be closer to the so-called action. It's not gonna end just by their presence. ADP made a recommendation of public safety, having private security come in. I shot that down and said, well, I'm sorry, you bring in private security, nothing against mall cops, but no one listens to the mall cop. And when it comes down to it, if the city has hired the mall cop, the person who gets injured by the mall cop is gonna sue the city. They're not going after the private security firm. So I would rather have trained professionals that are people that we see on a daily basis that have the respect of the constituents handling the situation, as opposed to random Joes that just graduated high school that might have a gun just because they took a class. So.
Any questions, Mr. Burns? I just offer that, and I know you're a very busy man, but if you could perhaps encapsulate some of your suggestions, I think they're pretty creative, and then submit it back through the mayor's office and this body, and perhaps even through the Public Safety Advisory Committee, and the mayor might have a comment.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I just give you the heads up that even if we were to get additional funds through that proposal, the tax cap will constrain what happens in terms of how those funds get expended.
Okay, like I said, I don't know the politics and the political side and the mechanisms. And another thing I had mentioned was make downtown from 9th Avenue to 3rd Avenue, from L to C Street, a public safety corridor. Double your traffic fines. You keep the people off the streets at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock with the tinted windows, all of that stuff. People slow down, they sure as hell slow down in school zones. And make downtown a school zone. We've had tourists get hit, we've had people get hit, we've had people that are intoxicated, not from any of our establishments, get run over, walk out in the middle of traffic. There's a lot of risks associated with it. And you know what? I'm not saying Big Brother is the best, but right now Big Brother needs to show his face downtown a little bit.
Mr. Evans,
More of a comment. I appreciate your comments. I couldn't agree more with your assessment of things. I work downtown, and all I have is anecdotal evidence, but it seems to me, and I think a lot of people feel the same way, that over the last, maybe 24 months or so, not sure how far back, we've really seen a sort of decline in safety and sort of the quality.
The brazenness has gone up tremendously.
And it's something that, whether it's, not only your proposals for how we can increase money for it, we have to have a comprehensive plan, I think, that deals with this and deals with it soon. And it's gonna take a lot of aspects, but I think.
Yeah, I've seen on hotel bills in California that it says public safety resource allocation. And it's just, it's a line item on a hotel bill. And I know that's unfair, I've never consulted with anyone in the hotel industry, but they're not gonna lose bookings based off of 1% or 1.5% charge.
If there's an additional tax, we can make it outside the tax bill, if we choose.
It has been done, but some of that stuff has to be voter approved.
I'm not one to ruffle the feathers, I'm just saying protect the city.
And it's, by the way, about 2/3, I think, the majority. Well, thank you, Mr. Burns, I appreciate your, for bringing the constituent, and again, when you get the time, if you could just, even just encapsulate what you suggested and put it before us, that'd be great.
No problem.
All right, folks, it is 11:47. Before I officially ring out this committee meeting, we do have a meeting starting in about 10 minutes. There's lunch. It's from Humvees, by the way. Myself and my legislative aide, Sherry Easley, has made sure it's provided at our expense, so it's not taxpayer money. You're welcome to grab some, put some in your pocket. Probably more food than there is people here. This is my last meeting, officially as the chair of this committee. When I came on this body, with my background in policing and law enforcement, my biggest concern was that I would be pigeonholed as the public safety guy. And I fought that, and I actually made that pitch to many other chairs, including this gentleman to my left, who first appointed me. And I asked that I not be just the public safety guy, I want to be viewed for a little more broad spectrum. Admittedly, I'm not the building total, land use Title 21 guy. There's probably a few other committees I probably shouldn't be on, or at least giving expert advice or guidance. I do feel like I fit this committee the best, and it's been just my honor and privilege to be able to serve under many of my chairs of the Assembly. And this is my final meeting, and coming in this door today, I will not miss Tuesday nights. I will not miss some of the community council evenings where I depart my schedule with my wife for dinners and things like that. But this is certainly one that I will miss. I want to just give a shout out to a few people that have bothered to come down. Mark Neal, our previous chief before Chris Tolley's here. Thank you, Chief. You've done years of service to our public safety in our city, and thanks for being a part of this committee meeting over the years and giving me guidance and input. I know that Gerard Aslan was here. He stayed pretty much the entire meeting, but had another meeting to go to. The ombudsman staff, all of my colleagues here at the Assembly, some that aren't even on the committee but keep coming anyway. The Assembly Council's office, I know Ms. Young's here, Ms. Tucker's always giving us info. There she is in the back. I know Diane Peterson's here from the chaplains, who did service as well. Seneca Fino, Mr. Sherwood representing the municipal council. And I guess thanks to the mayor, I haven't had you at one of my, well, no, we have. We've had you at one of our council meetings, our committee meetings before, but it was the first time I think Mr. Abbott joined us. So it's really a tremendous honor, and I'll miss this, and it certainly makes the motion stepping off the Assembly. But I want to congratulate personally from East Anchorage, Assembly Member-elect Forrest Dunbar. And again, I hope you make the pitch to the incoming chair, whether it's this one or as you align to be on this committee. It means a lot to me. So thank you one and all. Please join us for lunch, and we will use this room in about 10 minutes for the next meeting, but we have a few minutes to shake hands. So thanks, everybody. And this meeting's adjourned 11:50.